Edward Colston, great philanthropist of the Anglican Church of England, was drowned by BLM protesters in Bristol, England. William Carter Wickham, Confederate general, fell from grace in Richmond, Virginia, USA. Christopher Columbus, dismounted in different US cities for his role in the killings of many native Indians. And King Leopold II, brought down in Antwerp, Belgium, a city where he trafficked most of the diamonds stolen in Congo. The list goes on and on of the statues of disguised slavers that toppled over in the wave of BLM protest. However, there are many others, like Cecil Rhodes still triumphing in Oxford University, and Champollion standing on a pharaoh's head in the 5th arrondissement of Paris. Some argue that they must remain as witnesses to history, but there are other ways to do so, for example by replacing the fallen stars by real heroes of history. Hello dear passengers, this Sankofa flight is proposing alternative names of real heroes for statues. So if you have the mayor's contact of London, Bristol, Paris, Antwerp and all these US cities, do us a favor and pass the list on.
African History Daily by my daddy.
There is no other way to start this list for future statues than with a group of African abolitionists. Britain's first black political organization called the Sons of Africa, formed by the 1780s by Africans in England who had gained their freedom or escaped from enslavement. Membership included the famous writers Otaba Kugwano and Olaudah Equiano. Sold more times than an average car in Europe, 5 times exactly, before freeing himself, Olaudah Equiano definitely deserved a statue. He was born in what is now Nigeria, kidnapped and sold into slavery as a child. He endured the Middle Passage and ended up in Virginia. In 1757, at the age of 12, he was sold again to a naval captain who took him to England. He was sold twice more before managing to save enough money and buy his freedom for £40. As a freeman, he became active abolitionist. In 1789, Equiano published his autobiography titled The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano, a bestseller translated into many languages that began with a petition addressed to the UK Parliament and ended with his anti-slavery letter to the Queen. Equiano died in March 1797, but his book was vital to the abolition cause as it raised awareness on the horrors of the slave trade and inspiring others to join the early abolitionists, mostly represented by the Quakers. Quakers were mainly motivated by their religious beliefs regarding all human beings as equal. Their network of 50,000 religious dissenters in the UK and the US were seen as dangerous fanatics, but they fought slavery while churches across Europe and America, including Catholic popes and prestigious universities, virtuously accepted money from slavers in exchange for prayers and statues. In addition to directly lobbying Parliament, Quakers promoted consumer boycott of all goods produced by slave labor, including West Indian sugar, which had a considerable effect on demand. If only one Quaker was to be honored with a statue, then it would indisputably be the most prominent and ardent one, Quaker Anthony Benezet, an American abolitionist and educator. He founded one of the world's first anti-slavery societies, the Society for the Relief of Free Negroes Unlawfully Held in Bondage, and the Negro School at Philadelphia, which operated into the 19th century. Since Quakers were banned from public life, they strategically allied with others, mainly 3 Anglican figures: Philip Sansom, Granville Sharp, and the most instrumental one, Thomas Clarkson. Clarkson came to learn about slavery after participating and winning the first prize in a 1785 Cambridge University essay competition titled, "Is it lawful to enslave the unconsenting?" The competition was inspired by the Zong case in 1783, where 136 slaves were thrown overboard and their owners then claimed for the losses from their insurers. Clarkson lobbied, wrote and traveled extensively, setting up new abolition groups. He even reached out to several European leaders, including Tsar Alexander I of Russia and King Henry Christophe, the ruler of Haiti, where resistance movement has defeated both French and British forces and abolished slavery. Really too bad that while Clarkson was in France in 1814 and 1815, he could not meet the then too young Victor Schœlcher, who later became France's greatest abolitionist. He was motivated by the horrific abuses of slavery he witnessed while on a trip into the US in 1829. He then worked passionately to eliminate the abuses of colonialism and pleaded the cause of the blacks in the assembly. As a result of the combined action of all abolitionists and all the slaves, the slave trade was finally abolished in 1807 in the British Empire, slavery itself in 1833, and the apprenticeship system through which slaves had to work for their former masters as apprentices for 6 years with no pay ended in 1838. 10 years later, France abolished slavery while the US did the same in 1865. So according to you, who among those heroes deserve a statue? Who else should be added to this list? My African cliché of the day is a British man called Lawrence. No, not Lwrence of Arabia, but Lawrence Westgaph, a young British political activist from Nigeria and Jamaican descent who has set up a fundraising campaign to finally erect a statue in the city of Liverpool to honor African slaves' role in building the UK economy. He also produced the BBC programs Read the Signs, that examines the history of Liverpool street names. Now, let's remind ourselves that statues, just like streets and cities names, are meant to celebrate a person and sometimes horrible persons in history. And we now know that France will not remove statues of slavers and colonial settlers who killed many in the colonies. French President Emmanuel Macron said they don't want to rewrite history. He probably forgot that France did rewrite history when all streets and places named after Marechal Petain, an army guy who did so well during the First World War, but then messed up by allying with Hitler during the Second World War. France was so ashamed of his attitude that all those streets were renamed one by one, the last one in 2013. But while France is hiding behind excuses not to remove statues, isn't the real question about us as Africans? What is our leaders' position in this debate about the representation of history in public space in Africa? Shouldn't we question why so many cities like Brazzaville, Port Harcourt, Fort Portal, Francistown and Monrovia, for example, are still named after settlers and weirdos involved in the scramble for Africa and its enslavement? Dear friend, in 2020, how many avenues, cities, hospitals, squares and schools are still named after British Queen Victoria, after French General Charles de Gaulle, or after Portuguese missionaries?
How many? Why? When? So many questions for you to reflect on until we board again in September for season 3 of your podcast.
In the meantime, follow us on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and don't forget to rate the podcast. Thank you and goodbye.